The tribunal chamber had been in session for 9 hours when Commander Nadia Torin stood up and asked the presiding magistrate for permission to recall the witness. Magistrate Orvancel, a towering Drethani with mottled gray-green skin and 4 arms folded across the front of his judicial robe, regarded her from the elevated bench with an expression that mixed annoyance with something harder to read. His cranial ridges, 3 parallel lines of cartilage running from brow to the back of his elongated skull, had darkened to a deep charcoal. In Drethani physiology, that meant he was thinking carefully about whether to say no. "The witness has already been dismissed," he said. His voice carried through the acoustic architecture of the chamber without amplification, each syllable given the weight the Drethani reserved for judicial proceedings. "Advocate Torin, the testimony record is closed on this matter." "Respectfully, Magistrate, the testimony record is not closed." Nadia kept her voice level. She stood at the advocate's podium, a narrow slab of brushed steel and polished stone, positioned on the chamber floor below the magistrate's elevated bench and directly facing the tiered gallery, where 940 delegates from 14 species sat in curved rows beneath a vast glass dome. Through that dome, the pale shapes of 2 Terran destroyers held station against a cloudless blue sky, their hulls catching afternoon sunlight like flat gray knives. They had been there for 6 days, since the tribunal convened. Nobody on the floor mentioned them. Everyone in the gallery looked at them roughly once every 20 minutes. Under Article 14 of the Joint Tribunal Compact, Section 3, Nadia continued, the defense advocate retains the right to recall any witness whose testimony has been entered into the formal record, provided new evidence has come to light that materially contradicts or supplements the original testimony. The recall must be granted if the advocate can cite the specific evidentiary discrepancy. I can cite it. She placed a single data tablet on the podium's display cradle. The cradle's scanner read the document and projected a confirmation glyph above the surface in pale blue light. The glyph pulsed once and locked. Orvancel's 4 arms unfolded slowly. 2 of them settled on the bench surface. The other 2 remained suspended, the Drethani equivalent of a held breath. His compound-adjacent eyes, deep amber with vertical pupils, tracked the confirmation glyph, then Nadia, then the gallery. "The advocate will cite the discrepancy," he said, briefly. The witness testified under oath that the Terran garrison on Velhari Station was conducting unauthorized weapons testing in violation of the Neutral Corridor Treaty. The witness stated that he personally observed weapons discharge signatures on the station's monitoring array on 4 specific dates. Nadia touched the tablet. The holographic display above the podium shifted, showing a technical readout in assembly standard script. The monitoring array on Velhari Station was offline for maintenance on 2 of those 4 dates. The maintenance logs are filed with the Neutral Corridor Authority and were available to the prosecution before the witness was called. They were not disclosed to this tribunal. The chamber shifted, not all at once, but in a wave that started in the lower tiers, where the technical delegation sat, and moved upward through the diplomatic ranks to the senior galleries beneath the dome. 940 beings simultaneously processed the implication that the prosecution had either failed to check the maintenance logs or had checked them, and decided not to share what they found. Orvancel's cranial ridges went from charcoal to near black. He looked at the prosecution's table, a long curved desk on the opposite side of the chamber floor from Nadia's podium. 3 Kalori prosecutors sat there, their blue-white skin luminous under the chamber's institutional cyan lighting, their silver-threaded judicial robes arranged with the careful symmetry their species used to project authority. The lead prosecutor, a tall woman named Sevarith Leon, had risen halfway from her seat, her elongated fingers flat on the desk surface, her expression frozen in the particular stillness that Kalori used when calculating how much damage had just been done. "The witness is recalled," Orvancel said. Nadia Torin was 38 years old. She had served as a judge advocate in the Terran Confederation's Military Legal Division for 12 years, the last 4 assigned to the Office of Interstellar Legal Affairs, which handled cases before alien judicial bodies. Her record included 41 interstellar cases, 34 favorable outcomes, and a reputation among the alien legal establishment for being quiet, precise, and relentless in a way that made opposing counsel uncomfortable. She did not raise her voice. She did not make theatrical gestures. She asked questions, and she did not stop asking them until the answer she needed fell out of the space between what the witness wanted to say and what the evidence required. She was the only human on the chamber floor. Her staff, 2 junior advocates and a paralegal, had been barred from the tribunal floor 3 days ago on a procedural objection from the prosecution. The objection cited an obscure clause in the Joint Tribunal Compact limiting non-signatory defense teams to a single floor representative during active witness examination. Nadia had challenged the ruling. The challenge had been denied. She had filed a formal protest with the Compact's administrative office. The protest was under review. In the meantime, she stood alone at the podium, and her staff watched from the public gallery's upper tier, separated from her by 40 meters of curved seating, and the full weight of 900 alien delegates who had traveled to Velhari Station to watch a human military officer be buried under a case that the prosecution had spent 2 years building. The barring of her staff had not been a random procedural maneuver. It had been deliberate, timed to coincide with the prosecution's presentation of its core witness. With her junior advocates removed from the floor, Nadia could not pass notes, could not receive real-time research support, could not consult during recesses without leaving the chamber and forfeiting her right to address the next session without refiling for floor access. The prosecution had calculated that isolation would slow her, that the weight of 900 watchers and 14 species worth of procedural complexity would be enough to wear down a single human advocate working without support. They had miscalculated. The case itself was not complicated in its allegations. The Terran Confederation maintained a garrison on Velhari Station, a joint-use facility in the neutral corridor, the demilitarized zone separating the Kalori sovereignty from the Drethani Confederacy. The garrison's stated purpose was to operate a communications relay and provide medical support to civilian traffic passing through the corridor. 8 months ago, the Kalori sovereignty had filed a formal complaint with the Joint Tribunal alleging that the Terran garrison had been secretly testing directed energy weapons in the station's lower decks, in direct violation of the Neutral Corridor Treaty. The complaint was backed by testimony from a Kalori intelligence liaison named Vethan Orr, who claimed to have personally observed weapons discharge signatures on the station's monitoring array on 4 specific dates across the preceding cycle. If the tribunal ruled in favor of the prosecution, the consequences were absolute. The Terran Confederation would be expelled from the neutral corridor, stripped of its relay station, and subjected to reparation assessments that would effectively end its presence in the region for a generation. The Kalori sovereignty would absorb the vacated station infrastructure. The Drethani Confederacy, which had sponsored the tribunal as a formally neutral party, would gain leverage over both sides that it could spend for the next 50 years. The medical support that the Terran garrison provided to civilian traffic, free of charge, to any species, without political conditions, would end. The communications relay that carried 93% of the neutral corridor's civilian data traffic would be reclassified under Kalori operational authority. Everyone in the chamber understood these stakes. Nobody said them aloud. Vethan Orr entered through the witness corridor, a narrow passage on the eastern side of the hall that connected to the secure holding rooms. He was Kalori, tall and angular, with the blue-white luminous skin characteristic of his species and the silver threading in his judicial witness robe that marked him as a senior intelligence officer. His face was composed. His posture was straight. He walked to the witness platform, a circular disc of polished stone at the center of the chamber floor, positioned equidistant from the prosecution's table, the advocate's podium, and the magistrate's bench, and took his seat. The witness platform was designed for visibility. Every delegate in every tier could see the witness's face. The glass dome above filtered afternoon daylight onto the platform, so the witness was always the brightest figure in the room. The design was intentional. In Drethani judicial tradition, truth was supposed to be visible. "Witness Orr," Nadia said, "thank you for returning." Vethan Orr inclined his head. The movement was minimal, precise. "I am compelled by the tribunal's authority. Thanks are unnecessary." "I will be brief." Nadia touched the data tablet. The holographic display shifted to show a timeline, 4 dates highlighted in amber against a blue background. "In your original testimony, you stated that you personally observed weapons discharge signatures on the Velhari Station monitoring array on 4 dates, the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th of the preceding cycle. Is that correct?" "That is correct." The monitoring array on Velhari Station is a shared system, jointly operated by Kaylori, Drethani, and Terran technical staff. Access to the array's raw data requires authorization from all 3 operating authorities. Is that also correct? Vethan Orr paused. The pause was brief, no more than a heartbeat, but in a chamber tuned for acoustic precision, a heartbeat of silence carried weight. "The array is jointly operated." "That is correct." "And you, as a Kaylori intelligence liaison, access the array's data on those 4 dates to observe the weapons discharge signatures you described in your testimony." "I observed the signatures through standard monitoring protocols." Nadia did not move. She let the answer hang in the chamber's acoustics for 3 seconds. 3 seconds, in a room this size, with this many witnesses, was a long time. Standard monitoring protocols require authorization from all 3 operating authorities. Did you obtain authorization from the Terran Operating Authority to access the array data on those 4 dates? Vethan Orr's luminous skin dimmed slightly. In Kaylori physiology, the luminescence was tied to vascular flow, and vascular flow responded to stress. The change was subtle. In a private room, it might have gone unnoticed. On a witness platform under a glass dome in full daylight, in front of 940 delegates, it was visible to every being with light-sensitive perception. Authorization was obtained through the standard interagency channel. "I have the authorization logs for the Velhari Station monitoring array for the full preceding cycle." Nadia placed a second data tablet on the cradle. The holographic display split, showing the authorization log beside the timeline. 2 columns of data, side by side, in assembly standard script. No Kaylori access request was filed or approved for the 7th or the 21st. On those 2 dates, the monitoring array was offline for scheduled maintenance. The maintenance was conducted by Drethani technical staff under Work Order 774, filed with the Neutral Corridor Authority 40 days in advance. The work order is a public record. The gallery shifted again. In the 7th tier, a Drethani technical delegate had pulled up the work order on her own display tablet and was reading it with the careful attention of someone confirming what she had just heard. 2 seats down, a Veshani observer made a notation on a shared data tablet. In the 4th tier, a delegation Nadia did not recognize, small, gray-skinned, with wide-set dark eyes, had leaned collectively forward, their body language uniform in a way that suggested they were sharing a single assessment. "Witness Orr," Nadia said. Her voice did not rise, it did not need to. "If the monitoring array was offline on the 7th and the 21st, how did you observe weapons discharge signatures on those dates?" Vethan Orr's skin dimmed another fraction. The silver threading in his robe caught the dome light and threw thin lines of reflection across the witness platform. "The signatures may have been observed on adjacent dates. I would need to consult my records to confirm the precise timing. You testified under oath that you observed the signatures on 4 specific dates. You named those dates individually. You repeated them when asked for clarification by the prosecution during your original examination. Your testimony was entered into the formal record and has been cited by the prosecution as the primary evidentiary basis for the weapons testing allegation. Nadia's voice remained level, measured, without inflection. Are you now telling the tribunal that 2 of those 4 dates may be incorrect? Silence. The particular silence of 940 delegates watching a Kalori intelligence officer sit on a witness platform under a glass dome in afternoon daylight and calculate the distance between what he had said under oath and what the maintenance logs proved. The silence had texture. It had weight. It pressed against the dome glass and filled the spaces between the tiered seats. Sevarith Leon stood from the prosecution's table. Objection. The advocate is leading the witness toward a conclusion not supported by the evidence presented. Orvancel's cranial ridges had not lightened since the maintenance logs appeared on the holographic display. The advocate is presenting authenticated maintenance records that directly contradict the witness's sworn testimony on specific dates. The records are filed with a recognized authority. The contradiction is factual, not interpretive. The objection is overruled. The witness will answer. Vethon Orr folded his hands in his lap. The gesture was controlled, deliberate, the kind of movement a trained officer made when he needed to do something with his hands that was not visibly nervous. I observed weapons discharge signatures on the Velhari Station monitoring array. The specific dates may require correction. The observation itself is not in dispute. We will come to that. Nadia touched the tablet again. A third document appeared in the holographic display. This is the raw data log from the Velhari Station monitoring array for the 14th of the preceding cycle, one of the 2 dates the array was operational. The log shows all sensor readings recorded by the array during that 24-hour period. She advanced the display. Lines of data scrolled upward in assembly standard script, annotated with frequency readings, power levels, and source triangulation coordinates. The data was dense, technical, the kind of information that most of the delegates in the gallery could not read fluently, but the Drethani technical delegation could. And the Veshani observers, who maintained their own monitoring arrays in adjacent corridors, could. Nadia watched the 7th tier as the technical delegates began reading. Their expressions shifted first. There are no weapons discharge signatures in the data, Nadia said. The array recorded standard traffic telemetry, station power cycling, routine communications relay activity, and a total of 14 navigational beacon pings from civilian vessels transiting the corridor. The highest energy reading recorded on the 14th is a thermal spike at 0417 station time, consistent with the station's water reclamation system completing a scheduled purge cycle. She advanced to the next document. This is the raw data log for the 28th. The same categories of activity: standard telemetry, power cycling, relay traffic, beacon pings. No weapons discharge signatures. The highest energy reading is another thermal spike, this one at 1142 station time, again consistent with a water reclamation purge cycle. She placed both tablets on the cradle simultaneously. The holographic display expanded, showing the 2 data logs side by side with the 4-date timeline above them and the maintenance schedule flanking both sides. The composite display filled the air above the chamber floor with data, and the data told a single, clear story. On 2 of the 4 sworn dates, the array was off. On the other 2, it recorded nothing that matched a weapons discharge. Witness Orr, Nadia kept her eyes on him. You testified that you observed weapons discharge signatures on the monitoring array on 4 dates. The array was offline on 2 of those dates. The array data for the remaining 2 dates contains no weapons discharge signatures. Can you explain the discrepancy? Vethan Orr's luminescence had dropped to a level that Nadia recognized from her training in Kalori behavioral analysis, approximately 40% of baseline. At that level, the Kalori nervous system was routing blood away from the skin's bioluminescent layer and toward the core organs. It was not a fear response. It was a preparation response, the body readying itself for sustained confrontation. She had seen it in witnesses before. Always at the moment they realized the ground they were standing on had shifted. The signatures were observed through supplementary analysis, Vethan Orr said. The raw data required interpretation to isolate the weapon's consistent patterns. The patterns are not visible in unprocessed data. Supplementary analysis. Nadia repeated the phrase without inflection, the way she had been taught at the academy. Let the witness's own words do the work. Witness Orr, who conducted this supplementary analysis. The analysis was conducted by the Kalori Office of Strategic Assessment. The Kalori Office of Strategic Assessment is a division of the Kalori Intelligence Service. You are a senior officer in the Kalori Intelligence Service. Did you participate in the analysis? I supervised the analytical team. How many analysts were on the team? Vethan Orr's pause was longer this time. 2 heartbeats, 3. 3 analysts, supervised by you, produced the analysis that you then cited as the basis for your sworn testimony before this tribunal. Is that correct? That is correct. Were the 3 analysts given the raw array data and asked to analyze it independently, or were they given parameters, specific patterns to look for, specific dates to focus on, specific conclusions to test? Another pause. In the prosecution's table, Sevarith Leon had leaned toward her co-counsel, a compact Kalori man with silver-flecked skin, and was speaking in a voice too low for the chamber's acoustics to carry. The co-counsel's expression suggested the conversation was not going well. The analysts were provided with operational parameters consistent with the nature of the investigation, Vethan Orr said. Operational parameters, Nadia let the phrase settle. Were the operational parameters classified? Yes. Are the analysts' individual reports classified? Yes. Is the final analytical product, the supplementary analysis that you have cited as the basis for your testimony, classified? Yes. So the foundation of your testimony is a classified analysis, produced by a classified team, operating under classified parameters, supervised by you, which found weapons discharge signatures in data where the raw logs show none. And neither this tribunal nor the defense has been permitted to examine any of it. She did not frame it as a question. She did not need to. The structure of the statement was a question in itself, and the gallery heard it. I would like to see the supplementary analysis. Nadia's voice remained steady. Under Article 14, Section 7 of the Joint Tribunal Compact, the defense advocate has the right to examine any analytical product cited as the basis for witness testimony. I am formally requesting disclosure of the supplementary analysis conducted by the Kalori Office of Strategic Assessment. Sevarith Leon stood. This time her voice carried an edge that the chamber's acoustics turned into something the entire gallery could hear. The supplementary analysis is classified under Kalori sovereignty internal security protocols. Disclosure is not required under the Joint Tribunal Compact when the material falls under sovereign security exemptions. Nadia turned to the magistrate's bench. Magistrate's cell, Article 14, Section 7 contains no sovereign security exemption. The provision is absolute. If the analysis was cited as the basis for testimony before this tribunal, it is subject to disclosure regardless of the originating authority's internal classification protocols. The prosecution has made a choice. It chose to use classified material as the foundation for sworn testimony in a joint proceeding. That choice carries consequences. The consequence is disclosure. She paused one beat. The prosecution cannot build its house on hidden foundations and then invoke secrecy when the defense asks to inspect them. Orvancel looked at Sevarith Leon. He looked at Vethan Orr, still seated on the witness platform with his luminescence at 40% and his hands folded in his lap. He looked at Nadia. His forearms rearranged themselves on the bench surface in a configuration that Nadia had learned to read over 4 years of practice before alien judicial bodies. 2 arms flat, 2 arms raised with the palms angled outward. The decision was already made, and he was organizing the words to deliver it. The advocate's reading of Article 14, Section 7 is correct, he said. The sovereign security exemption applies to pretrial discovery and to materials not entered into the tribunal record. It does not apply to evidentiary material cited in sworn testimony before the tribunal. The compact's drafters were clear on this distinction. The prosecution will produce the supplementary analysis within 1 session cycle, or the testimony will be struck from the record. The gallery reacted. Not with noise, the Drethani judicial tradition frowned on vocal reactions during proceedings, but with motion. Delegates shifted in their seats. Data tablets were consulted. Screens were tapped. In the 4th tier, the delegation from the Veshani Trade Republic, a neutral observer bloc with no direct stake in the case, had begun passing a single data tablet down their row, each member reading something on it, and passing it to the next with the careful deliberation of people updating a shared assessment in real time. In the 9th tier, the Orelin Diplomatic Corps, who had remained motionless throughout the proceedings, exchanged a series of rapid hand signals that Nadia could not read but whose rhythm suggested urgency. Sevarith Leon sat down. Her expression had not visibly changed, but the silver threading in her robe had lost its careful symmetry. One shoulder was slightly forward, the other back. For a Kaylori prosecutor trained to present absolute composure at all times, that asymmetry was the equivalent of a visible flinch. Her co-counsel had stopped writing. The 3rd member of the prosecution team, a young Kaylori aide who had been managing the document displays, was staring at the holographic projection above the chamber floor as though the data had personally betrayed him. The session recessed. Orvancel called 20 minutes, struck his gavel, a heavy cylinder of polished stone that produced a single resonant note when it hit the bench, and the chamber began to decompress. Nadia returned to the small alcove behind the advocate's podium, a narrow space with a stone bench, a water dispenser, and a single window that looked out on the station's exterior dock. She sat down, pressed her palms against her knees, and breathed. She had been standing for 4 hours without a break. Her back ached. Her voice was beginning to thin at the edges, the way it always did during long proceedings, the vocal cords protesting the sustained effort of projecting into a room designed to carry a Drethani magistrate's resonant bass, not a human woman's controlled alto. Her junior advocate, Lieutenant Desmond Pear, appeared at the alcove's threshold 30 seconds later. He had come down from the public gallery during the recess, navigating the curved stairways and the security checkpoints with the speed of someone who had been waiting for this moment for 3 days. His face carried the particular expression of a young officer who had spent 72 hours unable to speak and was bursting with things to say. "They are not going to produce the analysis," he said. "No," Nadia agreed, "they are not." Which means his testimony gets struck. It gets struck from the record, but that is not the end of it. The prosecution built their entire case around Orr's testimony. It is the central pillar. Every other piece of evidence they presented was structured to support, extend, or elaborate on what Orr said he saw on those 4 dates. Remove the pillar and the structure has nothing to rest on. Desmond leaned against the doorframe. He was 24, sharp, and still young enough to be visibly excited by a courtroom win. The excitement was tempered by 3 days of enforced silence. "How did you know about the maintenance logs?" I requested the complete station operations record from the Neutral Corridor Authority on the first day of the tribunal. Standard procedure. It took 5 days for the request to be processed. The processing queue at the authority runs on Drethani administrative time, which is slower than ours by a factor of roughly 3. The maintenance schedule was in the third appendix of a 9-appendix operations packet. They didn't check it. They checked it. They knew the array was offline on 2 of the 4 dates. They filed the case anyway because they did not expect the defense to obtain the records independently. The Neutral Corridor Authority's standard processing time for records requests is 11 to 14 days. The tribunal's maximum duration is 7 days. They built the case on the assumption that by the time the records arrived, the tribunal would be over and the verdict would be sealed. But you filed on day 1. I file records requests on day 1 of every proceeding. Every time. It is the first thing I do before I unpack my satchel. Desmond stared at her. She could see him filing the lesson. There's more, Nadia said. She opened her satchel and pulled out a data tablet, the one she had not yet placed on the cradle. While the maintenance logs were in transit, I spent 5 days mapping the prosecution's case architecture. Every exhibit they submitted, every testimony reference, every citation chain that links back to Orr's 4 dates. I have a dependency chart. She turned the tablet so Desmond could see the screen. The chart was dense, color-coded, with lines connecting 23 prosecution exhibits to Orr's testimony in a web that made the structural dependency visible at a glance. 23 exhibits, she said. 17 cite Orr's testimony directly. 4 cited indirectly through secondary witnesses who were briefed by Orr's office before they testified. 2 are independent. What are the independent ones? Routine station inspection reports. They show standard power fluctuations, routine maintenance variances, and elevated thermal output in the water reclamation system. They do not mention weapons. They do not reference weapons discharge signatures. They are filler exhibits submitted to give the case the appearance of breadth. The recess bell sounded, a low harmonic tone that vibrated through the chamber's stone walls and carried into the alcove as a physical sensation in the chest. Nadia stood. She tucked the dependency chart back into her satchel. They have to respond now, and they are going to have to do it on the floor in front of 900 witnesses. The session reconvened. The chamber filled in a pattern Nadia had come to recognize over the past 6 days. The technical delegations first, seated and attentive, their instruments powered up before the gavel sounded. The diplomatic corps next, settling in with the measured pace of beings who did not wish to appear too eager. The senior galleries last, the high-ranking observers who arrived precisely on time to signal that they took the proceedings seriously, but had other matters competing for their attention. The glass dome above showed late afternoon sky, the light turning from white to pale gold. The 2 Terran destroyers still held station, gray and patient against the blue. Their running lights were not yet visible. The sun was still strong enough to turn their hull plates into flat mirrors. Sevarith Leon stood. Her posture had recovered its symmetry, which meant she had spent the recess rebuilding her position. She had the look of someone who had made a decision and was now committed to executing it regardless of the cost. Magistrate Cell. The prosecution respectfully informs the tribunal that the supplementary analysis conducted by the K. Lorry Office of Strategic Assessment cannot be produced within the session cycle. The material requires declassification review under K. Lorry sovereignty protocols, a process that takes a minimum of 30 standard days. The chamber absorbed the statement. In the lower tiers, the Drethani technical delegation exchanged glances. In the Veshani observation block, the shared data tablet resumed its passage along the row. Nadia stood. Magistrate Cell. The prosecution's inability to produce the analysis within the tribunal's timeline is a direct consequence of the prosecution's decision to build its case on classified material and present it through sworn testimony without arranging for disclosure in advance. The defense did not create this problem. The prosecution created it when it chose to cite classified work product on the witness stand. Under Article 14, Section 7, the remedy is clear and it is not optional. Testimony supported by undisclosed analytical material is struck from the record. Orvancel's cranial ridges were nearly black, the deepest shade Nadia had seen on a Drethani, and she had practiced before Drethani judicial bodies for 4 years. His vertical pupils had narrowed to slits, the physiological response to a decision that carried significant consequence and required absolute precision. He was not angry, he was processing. In Drethani judicial culture, the magistrate's role was not to take sides, not to protect either party, not to manage outcomes. The role was to enforce the procedural architecture of the compact with total fidelity. The architecture was clear, he knew it. The 940 delegates in the gallery knew he knew it. The witness's testimony is struck from the record, Orvancel said. The words fell into the chamber like stones dropped into still water. The acoustic design of the hall carried them to every seat, every tier, every ear and receptor that could register sound. In the lower tiers, a Drethani delegate leaned back and exhaled audibly, the breath loud in the structured silence. In the Veshani observation block, the shared data tablet had stopped moving. The last delegate holding it was writing something on its surface with careful, final strokes. In the prosecution's table, Sevarith Lyon's co-counsel placed both hands flat on the desk surface and did not move them. The young aide had closed his document display. The prosecution is further informed, Orvancel continued, that the striking of testimony under Article 14 triggers an automatic review of all remaining evidence submitted in support of the struck testimony, per Section 9 of the same article. The prosecution will identify within this session which elements of its remaining case are independent of the struck testimony and which are derivative. This review will be conducted on the floor. Sevarith Lyon's hands resting on the curved desk had curled slightly, not into fists, into the position Kaylori used when gripping a surface for stability, the fingers elongating, the joints locking, the luminescence in the fingertips fading. For a species that communicated partially through light, going dark at the extremities was a loss of composure that no training could fully suppress. Nadia did not present her dependency chart. She did not offer to help. She did not need to. The prosecution knew its own architecture. Sevarith Lyon had built the case. She knew which exhibits would survive the review and which would not. The mathematics were simple, and everyone in the chamber could do them once the first few answers came. Sevarith Lyon requested a recess to conduct the review in private. Orvancel denied the request, citing the tribunal's procedural clock. The clock had been running for 6 days. Its maximum duration under the Joint Tribunal Compact was 7. The prosecution had 22 hours remaining. The review would happen now, on the floor in the record. Sevarith Lyon began. She moved through the exhibits one by one, and for each one she stated a single word, whether it was independent of the struck testimony or derivative of it. Her voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a prosecutor executing a procedural obligation she could not avoid. Exhibit 1, independent. Exhibit 2, derivative. Exhibit 3, derivative. Exhibit 4, derivative. Exhibit 5, independent. Exhibit 6, derivative. Exhibit 7, derivative. The words accumulated like a count. By the 8th exhibit, the gallery had started to understand the pattern. By the 11th, it had gone so still that Nadia could hear the environmental system cycling air through the dome vents 50 meters above. By the 15th, several delegations had stopped watching the prosecution and were watching Nadia instead, studying her face for a reaction, looking for something, satisfaction, perhaps, or triumph. She gave them nothing. She stood at the podium, her hands resting flat on the brushed steel surface, and watched the prosecution dismantle its own case one exhibit at a time. Exhibit 16, derivative. Exhibit 17, derivative. Exhibit 18, derivative. Exhibit 19, independent. The third independent exhibit. Nadia noted it. She had counted 2 in her dependency chart. This was a surprise. She filed it and kept her expression unchanged. Exhibit 20, derivative. Exhibit 21, derivative. Exhibit 22, derivative. Exhibit 23, derivative. 23 exhibits, 3 independent, 20 derivative. The chamber absorbed the final count in silence. Nadia's dependency chart had missed one independent exhibit, Exhibit 19, which she would need to examine. The miss was minor. The verdict was the same. The prosecution's case had been built around a single witness, and the single witness's testimony was gone. Sevareth Leon finished the review and sat down. The silver threading in her robe had gone dull throughout the last 10 minutes, the caloric stress response pulling luminescence inward, the body conserving energy for the systems that mattered. She folded her elongated fingers on the desk surface and said nothing further. Orvancel looked at Nadia. The defense may now address the 3 remaining independent exhibits. Nadia picked up the first 2 in 6 minutes each. Exhibits 1 and 5 were routine station inspection reports conducted by Kalori technical staff, assigned to the station through a bilateral agreement that, as Nadia demonstrated with a single paragraph from the agreement text projected on the holographic display, required the inspecting authority to provide a copy of all reports to the station commander within 7 standard days. The reports submitted to the tribunal had not been provided to the Terran station commander. They had been filed directly with the Kalori Office of Strategic Assessment, the same office that had produced Vethon Orr's classified supplementary analysis, bypassing the required disclosure entirely. The reports themselves showed nothing that constituted a treaty violation, standard power fluctuations, routine maintenance variances, elevated thermal output in the water reclamation system on the same dates that the monitoring array data showed thermal spikes consistent with purge cycles. The reports did not mention weapons. They mentioned a water heater doing its job. Exhibit 19 was the surprise. Nadia pulled it up on the holographic display and read it for 30 seconds before speaking. It was a communications intercept, a transmission between the Terran garrison commander and the Office of Interstellar Legal Affairs, recorded by the Neutral Corridor Authority's automated traffic monitoring system, and submitted to the tribunal as evidence of Terran awareness of the allegations before the formal complaint was filed. The transmission was 3 lines long, an administrative query about the garrison's legal standing under the Neutral Corridor Treaty, a request for a legal opinion on the applicable provisions, and a notation that the query was routine and had been generated by the garrison commander's annual compliance review. There was nothing in it that suggested awareness of weapons testing, awareness of the Kalori complaint, or awareness of anything beyond a commander checking the rules, because the calendar said it was time to check the rules. This exhibit demonstrates that the Terran garrison commander conducted a routine annual compliance review, Nadia said. The prosecution submitted it as evidence of guilty knowledge. It is evidence of administrative diligence. She set the tablet down. The defense has no further questions regarding the independent exhibits. Orvancel looked at the prosecution's table for a long time. His forearms were still. The cranial ridges were the darkest shade of charcoal black that Nadia had seen on a living Drethani. The chamber waited. 940 delegates waited. The dome light had shifted from pale gold to the deeper amber of late afternoon, and the shadows in the chamber had lengthened, pulling the cooler cyan ambient light forward as the warm daylight retreated. The prosecution's remaining independent exhibits do not support the original allegation, he said. His voice had dropped half a register. The tribunal finds that the evidentiary basis for the complaint filed by the Kalori sovereignty against the Terran Confederation garrison on Velhari Station is insufficient to sustain the charge. The complaint is dismissed. He paused. The pause lasted 4 seconds. In a chamber designed for a Drethani magistrate's voice, 4 seconds was long enough for the word dismissed to decay completely, leaving clean silence for what came next. The tribunal further notes, he continued, and his voice had dropped to a register that Nadia recognized as the Drethani equivalent of controlled fury, not anger at the parties, but anger at the violation of the system he had spent 30 years upholding, that the withholding of the monitoring array maintenance schedule from the defense, the use of classified analytical material as the foundation for sworn testimony without disclosure, the failure to provide station inspection, reports to the Terran station commander as required by bilateral agreement, and the barring of the defense advocate's support staff through a procedural objection timed to coincide with core witness testimony constitute, individually and collectively, procedural violations of the Joint Tribunal Compact. The tribunal will refer these matters to the Compact's Oversight Commission for formal investigation. The referral landed in the gallery like a second verdict. A formal investigation by the Oversight Commission could result in sanctions against the Kalori Sovereignty's legal division, restrictions on its future participation in joint tribunals, mandatory disclosure reforms, and most significantly in the political calculus of the neutral corridor. A precedent that would make it extraordinarily difficult for the Kalori to bring another case against any Terran installation on any grounds for a decade or more. The Commission's investigative authority extended to the individuals involved: Sevarith Leon, Vethon Orr, the unnamed analysts, the officials who had approved the complaint. Sevarith Leon stood. Her voice was controlled, but the luminescence in her skin had dropped to a level that suggested she was operating on professional discipline and nothing else. The prosecution reserves the right to appeal the dismissal under Article 22. Orvancel regarded her from the bench. His cranial ridges were still near black, but the angle of his head had shifted, tilting slightly to one side, which in Drethani body language indicated that he was about to speak as a judge, not as an administrator. "The prosecution may appeal," he said. "The appeal will be heard by a panel that will have access to the full tribunal record, including the monitoring array maintenance schedule, the authorization logs, the raw data logs, the station inspection reports, the undisclosed analytical material, which the prosecution will now be required to declassify for the appellate record under Section 12 of the appeal provisions, the dependency review conducted on this chamber floor, and the tribunal's referral to the Oversight Commission." He paused. "The prosecution is advised to consult with its principals before filing." He did not say the appeal would fail. He did not need to. The architecture of the tribunal record now contained every piece of the prosecution's own deconstruction, documented in real time, on the chamber floor, in front of 940 delegates. An appellate panel would not review the case. It would review the collapse. Sevarith Leon sat down. She did not speak again. Orvancel turned to Nadia. His expression had shifted. The cranial ridges were still dark, but the angle of his head had changed again, tilting slightly forward, which in Drethani body language indicated acknowledgement. Not gratitude, not warmth, not congratulations. Acknowledgement of something done correctly within the system he had spent 3 decades upholding. "Advocate Torin," he said, "the tribunal recognizes the defense's contribution to the procedural integrity of these proceedings." Nadia inclined her head. The motion was brief, controlled. "The defense thanks the tribunal for its adherence to the compact." That was it. No speech, no declaration, No summation of what had happened or why it mattered or what the human species had proven or what the Kalori should learn. The tribunal's procedural architecture had done the work. She had simply known where the joints were, which ones were load-bearing, and which ones had been assembled with material that could not support the weight placed on them. The session adjourned. The delegates began to file out of the gallery in the measured, deliberate way that alien diplomatic corps departed significant proceedings, slowly enough to signal that they were processing the implications, quickly enough to signal that they had offices and capitals and intelligence briefings where those implications would be discussed in detail. Nadia remained at the podium. She watched the chamber empty from the bottom tiers upward. Through the glass dome, the sky had shifted from amber to the deeper violet of approaching evening. The two Terran destroyers were silhouettes now, dark and sharp against the colored sky, their running lights beginning to glow as the daylight faded green on the port sides, red on the starboard, white at the sterns. They had not moved. They had not transmitted. They had not done anything for 6 days except exist in the sky above a glass dome. Nobody had mentioned the destroyers during the proceedings. Nobody had needed to. Their presence was not a threat. It was a statement of the same kind Nadia had made on the chamber floor. We are here. We are prepared. We do not leave until the record is complete. Desmond came down from the gallery. He stopped at the edge of the chamber floor and looked at her across the empty witness platform. "What happens now?" he asked. "The Kalori withdraw the complaint formally within 72 hours. They will not appeal. The Oversight Commission opens an investigation that takes 6 to 8 months. During that time, the Kalori Legal Division is restricted from filing new complaints against any Terran installation in the neutral corridor. The garrison stays. The relay stays. The medical support stays. The civilian data traffic continues to route through our systems without interruption." And the witness? Vethon Orr gave testimony under oath that he observed events on dates when the equipment required to observe them was not operational. He then cited a classified analysis that he himself supervised as the basis for observations the raw data does not support. Whether that was intentional fabrication or a failure of the analytical process, the Oversight Commission will determine. His testimony is permanently struck. His credibility before any future tribunal in the compact is ended. Desmond was quiet for a moment. He looked at the empty witness platform, still lit by the last of the dome light, the polished stone surface throwing a faint reflection upward into the darkening chamber. "You filed the records request on day 1, he said. "Day 1 every time. What if the records had come back clean? What if the maintenance schedule confirmed the array was online on all 4 dates?" Nadia looked at him. "Then I would have needed a different line of questioning. The answer would have been somewhere else in the record. It always is. But the records are always worth requesting because you always want to know what actually happened before you walk into the room. The truth is not a strategy. It is the starting position." She picked up her data tablets from the cradle, placed them in her satchel, and buckled it shut. The chamber was nearly empty. A few Drethani custodial staff had entered through the service corridors and were adjusting the seating tiers with quiet efficiency, resetting the chamber for its next use. The holographic displays along the walls had dimmed to standby, their cyan glow fading to a soft pulse. She walked toward the exit corridor. As she passed the prosecution's table, she saw that Sevarith Leon was still seated, alone, her co-counsel and aide gone. Her hands were flat on the desk surface. She was staring at the holographic display cradle where the dependency review had been projected, where she had stood and said, "Derivative," 20 times in front of 900 witnesses. The display was dark now. She was looking at the space where her case had been. Nadia did not stop. There was nothing to say. The record said everything, and it would say it again when the Oversight Commission convened, and again when some future prosecutor weighed whether to build a case on classified testimony, And again, every time someone in the neutral corridor asked whether the Terran garrison had been testing weapons on Velhari Station. The answer would always be the same answer, documented on the chamber floor, in the raw data, in the maintenance logs that the prosecution had hoped would arrive 11 days too late. She stepped into the station corridor. The lighting was cooler here, institutional blue-white, replacing the dome-filtered warmth of the chamber. Through a corridor window, the two destroyers were visible against the darkening sky, their running lights steady, their silhouettes unchanged from the position they had held for 6 days. A small civilian transport, a medical shuttle with Terran markings, was rising from the station's docking bay and climbing toward the corridor's transit lane. It would reach the next station in 4 hours and deliver medications that 3 species depended on. The garrison made that run twice a week. It had made that run for 11 years. That was what the tribunal had been about. Not a weapons allegation, not a treaty violation, a relay station and a medical shuttle, and the 11 years of quiet service that the Kalori sovereignty had decided to erase because the Terran presence in the neutral corridor was inconvenient to its strategic planning. Nadia walked to the communications alcove at the end of the corridor and composed a secure message to the Office of Interstellar Legal Affairs. 3 lines. Complaint dismissed. Full referral to Oversight Commission. Garrison status unchanged. She sent it, closed the terminal, and stood for a moment looking out the window. Somewhere in the station, Vethan Orr was in a holding room, surrounded by Kalori legal staff, being asked to explain how a senior intelligence officer had sworn to observations made on dates when the equipment was turned off. Somewhere else, Sevarith Leon was sitting at an empty desk, calculating the cost of an appeal she would never file. Somewhere on Earth, the office would receive the 3-line message and begin the quiet administrative work of updating the garrison's legal status from contested to cleared. Nadia adjusted her satchel on her shoulder. The weight of the data tablets inside was familiar. The weight of preparation, of records requested and received and read and cross-referenced, of knowing the terrain before stepping onto it, of trusting that the rules meant what they said, and that if you knew them better than your opponent, you did not need to shout. She turned from the window and walked down the corridor toward her quarters. There were forms to file, a case summary to draft, and a formal response to the prosecution's barring of her staff to prepare. The work was not dramatic. It never was. It was procedural, methodical, built on the quiet assumption that the system worked when someone insisted on it working, and that insisting did not require volume. It required precision. The destroyers held station outside the dome. The garrison remained on Velhari. The medical shuttle climbed toward the transit lane. The tribunal record was sealed and filed. And Commander Nadia Torin, judge advocate, walked down a corridor alone, carrying the same satchel she had carried into the chamber 9 hours earlier, and she did not look back.